The first shot came from inside the train, followed by the sound of shattering glass and a woman's scream that carried over the clatter of wheels against steel rails. Sophia Beaumont clung to the edge of the passenger car door, her knuckles white, her heart hammering as the wind whipped her chestnut hair across her face. Behind her, a man in a black suit advanced, blood trickling from his split lip where she'd struck him with her reticule. "You'll regret that, Miss Beaumont," he snarled, lunging for her. Sophia dodged his grasp, but the rocking motion of the train sent her stumbling backward. The door swung open wider behind her as the train rounded a bend. One misstep, one moment of imbalance, and suddenly she was falling, tumbling through empty air, her skirts billowing around her like a parachute. The world spun in a blur of blue sky and brown earth. She hit the ground with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs, rolling and skidding down an embankment of loose rock and scrub brush. Pain exploded through her body as she finally came to rest, dust settling around her in the Montana afternoon. Through the ringing in her ears, Sophia heard the distant thunder of hooves. She tried to move to call out, but her voice caught in her throat. The train continued its journey westward, a plume of black smoke trailing behind it, growing smaller in the distance. The hoofbeats grew louder. A shadow fell across her face. Sophia blinked up into the sun, making out the silhouette of a man on horseback, the brim of his hat outlined against the sky. "Madam, can you hear me?" His voice was deep, tinged with concern. Sophia tried to respond, but only managed a weak groan. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. He knelt beside her, and she saw him clearly for the first time: sun-bronzed skin, eyes the color of a summer storm, stubble darkening a strong jawline. "Don't try to move," he said, gently checking her for broken bones. "Name's Lucas Winters. I saw you fall from that train." "Sophia," she managed, wincing as pain shot through her ribs. "Sophia Beaumont." Lucas nodded, his expression grave. "Miss Beaumont, we need to get you to a doctor." That was quite a fall. His eyes darted to the disappearing train, then back to her. Was it an accident? Sophia's mind flashed to the man in the black suit, the one who'd been pursuing her since St. Louis. "No," she whispered. "It wasn't." The cowboy's jaw tightened. Without another word, he slipped one arm beneath her shoulders, the other under her knees. "This might hurt," he warned before lifting her. Despite his care, pain lanced through her body, and darkness encroached on the edges of her vision. The last thing Sophia remembered was being settled onto his horse, the warmth of his chest against her back as he mounted behind her, one strong arm holding her securely as they began to move across the rugged terrain. When Sophia next opened her eyes, she was lying on a bed in an unfamiliar room. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting dappled patterns across a simple quilt. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then the memory of falling from the train rushed back, along with the pain in her body. "You're awake." A woman with silver-streaked hair tied back in a neat bun stood in the doorway, holding a basin of water. "That's good. You gave us quite a fright, young lady." Sophia tried to sit up, but her muscles protested. "Where am I?" "You're at the Winters Ranch, about 15 miles outside of Butte." The woman moved to her bedside, setting down the basin and wringing out a cloth. "I'm Martha Winters, Lucas's aunt. He brought you here yesterday afternoon." "Yesterday?" Sophia's voice rose in alarm. "I've been unconscious that long. Doc Simmons gave you something for the pain. Said you were lucky, no broken bones, just some nasty bruises and a sprained wrist." Martha pressed the cool cloth to Sophia's forehead. "Lucas told us what happened, said you were thrown from the train." Sophia hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "Yes, there was an incident." Martha's kind eyes studied her face. Well, you're safe now. You can stay here until you're well enough to travel, though I suspect my nephew wouldn't mind if that took a while. A knowing smile played at her lips. Before Sophia could ask what she meant, boots thudded on the porch outside and Lucas's voice called out, "Aunt Martha, is she awake yet?" "Come see for yourself," Martha replied, standing back as Lucas appeared in the doorway, removing his hat as he entered. In the clear light of day, Sophia could see him properly for the first time. He was taller than she'd realized, broad-shouldered in a faded blue shirt, his dark hair curling slightly at the collar. When his eyes met hers, something flickered in their depths: relief, and perhaps something more. "Miss Beaumont," he said, his voice softer than before. "Good to see you awake, Mr. Winters. I owe you my life." Sophia's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you for what you did." Lucas shook his head. "Anyone would have done the same. But it wasn't anyone, it was you." Sophia held his gaze until he looked away, a flush creeping up his neck. Martha cleared her throat. "I'll leave you two to talk while I fix some broth. The lady needs her strength." She gave Lucas a pointed look before bustling out of the room. When they were alone, Lucas pulled a chair beside the bed and sat, his hat in his hands. "Miss Beaumont, I don't mean to pry, but I need to know, was someone trying to harm you on that train?" Sophia sighed, her fingers plucking at the quilt. "Yes, a man named Edward Thornton. He works for my stepfather." "And why would your stepfather send someone after you?" "Because I discovered something I wasn't supposed to know." Sophia's voice dropped to a whisper. "Documents proving he murdered my father." Lucas's eyes widened. "That's a serious accusation. I have proof." "Or I did until—" Sophia's hand flew to her throat. "My locket, it's gone." Panic seized her as she patted the bed covers. "This locket." Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver oval on a delicate chain. "It came off during the fall. I found it when I went back to search the area this morning." Relief flooded through her as he placed it in her palm. "Thank you. This contains a key to a lockbox in Butt. Inside is evidence that could put my stepfather behind bars." Lucas's expression grew serious. "So you were headed to Butt when this happened?" Sophia nodded. "My mother's cousin lives there. I was going to stay with her while I presented the evidence to the authorities." "Your stepfather must be a powerful man to send someone after you on a train." "Henry Blackwell owns half of St. Louis," Sophia said bitterly. "And he has friends in high places. When my father died 3 years ago, everyone accepted that it was an accident. Everyone except me." Lucas was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "Well, Miss Beaumont, it seems you've landed right where you needed to be. Butt is just half a day's ride from here, and I know the sheriff personally." Hope blossomed in Sophia's chest. "You'll help me." "I will." His eyes held a steely determination. "No one should get away with murder, no matter how rich or powerful they are." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "I've been alone in this for so long. I can't tell you what your help means to me." Lucas reached out, hesitating briefly before covering her hand with his own. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle. "You're not alone anymore, Miss Beaumont." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words, and the strange, sudden connection of two lives intersecting in the vast expanse of the Montana Territory. Outside, the wind rustled through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out wild and free in the autumn sky of 1885. For the next 3 days, Sophia's world narrowed to the 4 walls of the guest bedroom at the Winters Ranch. Her body needed time to heal, and despite her urgency to reach Butt, she couldn't deny the necessity of rest. Each day, Martha tended to her bruises with arnica salve and kept her company with stories of frontier life. Each evening, Lucas would return from his work around the ranch to sit with her after supper, their conversation stretching late into the night. On the fourth morning, Sophia awoke feeling stronger. She carefully swung her legs over the side of the bed, testing her weight on her feet. The dizziness that had plagued her was gone, and though her body still ached, the sharp pains had subsided to a dull throb. Taking a deep breath, she stood and slowly walked to the window. The Winters ranch spread out before her, a two-story farmhouse surrounded by corrals, a barn and outbuildings, all nestled in a valley with pine-covered mountains rising in the distance. In one of the corrals, Lucas was working with a young horse, his movements patient and sure as he guided the animal in a circle. Sophia found herself watching him, admiring the ease with which he handled the spirited colt. There was something compelling about Lucas Winters, not just his undeniable good looks, but a quiet strength, a steadiness that made her feel safe for the first time in years. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Martha entered with a bundle of clothing. "Good morning, dear." "I see you're up and about," she smiled approvingly. "I've brought you some things to wear. They belonged to my daughter Sarah before she married and moved to Idaho. Should fit you well enough." "Thank you," Sophia said, grateful to have something other than her torn traveling dress. "Mrs. Winters, I can't express how much your kindness has meant to me." Martha waved away her thanks. "It's what neighbors do out here, child. The West can be harsh. We survive by helping one another." She laid the clothes on the bed. "Now, if you're feeling up to it, breakfast is ready, and I suspect you're tired of eating in bed." Sophia nodded eagerly. "I'd love to join you at the table." After changing into a simple blue calico dress that fit her surprisingly well, Sophia made her way carefully down the stairs. The main room of the Winters home was warm and inviting, with a large stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and colorful quilts draped over chairs. The walls were lined with bookshelves, a sight that made Sophia's heart leap with pleasure. She had always found solace in books. Lucas's father, William Winters, a tall man with the same storm-gray eyes as his son, looked up from his newspaper as she entered. "Miss Beaumont, good to see you on your feet." He stood and pulled out a chair for her. "Come, sit and have some breakfast." Sophia had just settled at the table when the back door opened and Lucas entered, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and horses. He stopped short when he saw her, his expression brightening. "Miss Beaumont, you're up." "Yes, and feeling much better thanks to your family's care," she replied, suddenly conscious of how she must look in the borrowed dress, her hair hastily pinned up. If Lucas noticed any deficiency in her appearance, he gave no sign of it. Instead, he smiled, a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made something flutter in Sophia's chest. "That's good to hear," he said, taking his seat at the table after washing his hands at the basin. "I was thinking if you're feeling strong enough, we might head into Butte tomorrow." Sophia straightened in her chair. "Yes, I'd like that very much." William exchanged a glance with his wife. "Son, are you certain that's wise?" "Miss Beaumont is still recovering, and if there's trouble following her—" "All the more reason to get to the sheriff," Lucas replied firmly. "The longer we wait, the more likely it is that Thornton or someone else will come looking for her." Sophia's appetite vanished at the thought. "Do you really think they would track me here?" Lucas's expression softened. "It's just a precaution, Miss Beaumont. But yes, if this Thornton fellow is determined enough, he might have gotten off at the next station and doubled back." "Then I've put your family in danger by being here," Sophia said, distressed. "Nonsense," Martha interjected, placing a plate of hot cakes before her. "The Winters family has faced down worse than some city slicker with a grudge. Besides, we're not exactly easy to find unless you know where to look." William nodded in agreement. "Martha's right, and Lucas won't be taking you into town alone. I'll go with you and we'll bring Frank and Tom along as well." He turned to Sophia. "Frank's our foreman and Tom's our best hand, both handy with a rifle if needed." The matter-of-fact way they discussed potential violence should have frightened Sophia, but instead she found it reassuring. These people understood the stakes and were willing to help her despite the risk. "Thank you," she said simply, looking at each of them in turn. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "Eat your breakfast," Martha replied with a smile. "That'll be payment enough for now." After breakfast, Lucas suggested a short walk to help Sophia regain her strength. They strolled slowly around the yard, staying close to the house in deference to her healing body. When they reached a bench beneath an old oak tree, Sophia gratefully sat down, still unused to being on her feet for long. "Tell me about your father," Lucas said as he settled beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. Sophia's hand went to her locket. "He was a good man, kind, honest to a fault. He built a successful shipping business in St. Louis from nothing." Pride colored her voice. "Everyone respected Alexander Beaumont. When he married my mother after my birth father died, he raised me as his own. And your mother, is she still alive?" "Yes, though I fear what my stepfather might do to her if he discovers I've gone to the authorities." Worry creased her brow. "She's always been fragile, especially after losing my birth father when I was just a baby. When Alexander died, something in her broke. She turned to laudanum to ease her grief, making her easy to control," Lucas observed. Sophia nodded. "Exactly. Henry, my stepfather, keeps her sedated and isolated. I doubt she even knows I'm gone." "What made you suspect your stepfather of murder?" "Little things at first. Inconsistencies in the story of how my father's horse was spooked on a ride they took together. Then documents I found in my father's study papers showing that Henry had been embezzling from the company for years, and my father had discovered it just before he died." Lucas whistled softly. "And these papers are in a lockbox in Butt?" "Yes. I sent them ahead with a trusted friend who works for the railroad. The key is hidden in my locket." She opened the silver oval to reveal a tiny key nestled beside a miniature portrait of her parents. "I knew if I carried the documents myself, they might be discovered." "Smart thinking." Lucas's admiration was evident in his voice. "But how did Thornton find you on the train?" "I don't know," Sophia admitted. "I was so careful. I told no one where I was going, purchased my ticket at the last minute, even wore a veil to board the train." Her fingers twisted nervously in her lap. "He must have been watching the station." Lucas was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for threats. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow," he said finally. "The sooner we get those documents to Sheriff Miller, the better." "You think he'll believe me?" "A woman accusing a powerful man of murder. Miller's a good man. Fair. He'll listen to evidence, no matter who presents it." Lucas's hand moved to cover hers, stilling her nervous fingers. "And you won't be alone when you do it." The warmth of his hand sent a current through Sophia that had nothing to do with her injuries. In the few days she'd known Lucas Winters, he had become her protector, her confidant, and perhaps, though she hardly dared admit it, something more. "Thank you," she said softly, looking up at him. "For everything." His eyes held hers, and for a moment Sophia thought he might say something more. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "We should head back," he said, rising and offering his arm for support. "You need to rest for the journey tomorrow." As they walked back to the house, Sophia leaned slightly on his arm, drawing strength from his solid presence. Whatever dangers lay ahead in Butt, she would face them with Lucas Winters at her side, a man who had already saved her once and seemed determined to do so again. Dawn broke clear and cold over the Montana landscape as Sophia stepped onto the porch of the Winters home, wrapped in a woolen cloak borrowed from Martha. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, though autumn still painted the distant hills in golds and reds. Her breath fogged in the early morning light as she watched the men prepare for their journey to Butte. Lucas was saddling a gentle mare for her to ride, while his father and the ranch hands, Frank and Tom, checked their weapons and secured provisions. The casual efficiency with which they armed themselves reminded Sophia of the potential danger they might face, a danger she had brought to their doorstep. Martha joined her on the porch, pressing a small bundle into her hands. "Some food for the journey," she explained, "and a few other necessities." "I don't know how to thank you," Sophia began, but Martha shook her head. "No need for thanks between friends." The older woman adjusted Sophia's cloak, tucking it more securely around her shoulders. "Just promise you'll come back and visit us when this is all over." The simple assumption that there would be an after, that Sophia would survive this ordeal and have a future worth planning, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "I promise," she whispered. Lucas approached, leading the saddled mare. "Ready, Miss Beaumont?" Sophia nodded, tucking the bundle into a saddlebag. "As ready as I'll ever be." With practiced ease, Lucas lifted her onto the horse, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Even through layers of clothing, his touch sent warmth spreading through her body, a feeling that had nothing to do with the morning chill. "You'll ride beside me," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "If there's any trouble, you stay close. Understand?" "Yes," Sophia replied, touched by his concern. Soon they were underway, Lucas and Sophia in the lead, William and the ranch hands forming a protective circle around them. The journey to Butte would take most of the day, following trails through valleys and foothills rather than the more direct route along the railroad tracks. As they rode, the landscape unfolded before them, vast and breathtaking in its wild beauty. Despite the circumstances, Sophia found herself captivated by the majesty of the Montana Territory, so different from the crowded streets of St. Louis. "It's beautiful," she said, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. Lucas glanced at her, a smile warming his features. "It is. I've traveled some Denver, San Francisco, even Chicago once, but nothing compares to this." "Have you lived here all your life?" he nodded. "Born and raised. My grandfather settled this land after the war, the Mexican War, that is, built the ranch from nothing." Pride was evident in his voice. "Been winter's land ever since." "You love it," Sophia observed. "It's in my blood." Lucas's gaze swept over the rolling hills. "Some men need cities and crowds. I need this open sky, good land, room to breathe." Sophia tried to imagine it, a life here, far from the society constraints and political machinations of St. Louis. "It must be a good life, despite its hardships." "It is." Lucas studied her face. "What about you, Miss Beaumont? What kind of life were you planning before all this happened?" The question caught Sophia off guard. In truth, she hadn't allowed herself to think much beyond exposing her stepfather's crimes. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I was raised to be a society wife, music, languages, proper etiquette, but that life never felt right to me." "What does feel right?" Sophia considered this as they rode, the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves marking time. "Books," she said finally. "Learning. I always wanted to teach, but my stepfather considered it beneath our family's station." "Sounds like Henry Blackwell cares more about appearances than happiness." "He cares about power," Sophia corrected. "Money and influence, nothing more." They fell silent again, each lost in thought as the miles passed beneath them. Around midday, they stopped by a clear stream to rest the horses and eat some of the food Martha had packed. Sophia eased herself carefully from the saddle, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. Though she had ridden horses all her life, her injuries made the journey more taxing than usual. Lucas was at her side immediately. "Are you all right?" "Just sore," she assured him. "Nothing serious." William approached, his weathered face creased with concern. "We could make camp here if you need more rest, Miss Beaumont." "No," Sophia said firmly. "We need to reach Butte today. I'll be fine." Lucas exchanged a glance with his father, then nodded. "We'll rest here for an hour, then continue. That should get us to town by late afternoon." While the men tended to the horses, Sophia found a smooth rock by the stream and sat, trailing her fingers in the cold water. The peaceful scene belied the turmoil in her heart, fear of what awaited them in Butte, anxiety about facing down her stepfather's influence, and beneath it all, a growing awareness of her feelings for Lucas Winters. It was foolish, she knew, to develop an attachment to a man she had known for less than a week. Yet there was something about Lucas that resonated with her, his quiet strength, his unwavering sense of justice, the gentleness beneath his rugged exterior. In another life, under different circumstances. "Penny, for your thoughts." Lucas's voice interrupted her reverie as he sat beside her, offering a tin cup of coffee. Sophia accepted the cup gratefully, the warmth seeping into her chilled fingers. "I was just thinking about what happens after all this, if I succeed in bringing my stepfather to justice." "When," Lucas corrected. "When you succeed." A smile tugged at her lips. "Your confidence is reassuring. It's not confidence, it's certainty. Truth has a way of coming to light, especially when brave people fight for it." His gaze held hers, earnest and unwavering. "And you, Sophia Beaumont, are one of the bravest people I've ever met." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a thrill through her. "I don't feel brave," she confessed. "Most of the time I'm terrified. That's what courage is, being afraid but doing what's right anyway." From across the clearing, William called out, "Lucas, riders approaching from the east." In an instant, Lucas was on his feet, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he instructed, his voice low and urgent. "If there's trouble, get to the trees and hide." Before Sophia could respond, he was gone, moving swiftly to join his father and the ranch hands who had already positioned themselves strategically around the clearing. With her heart pounding, Sophia edged closer to the tree line, ready to flee if necessary. Through the branches, she could make out a group of riders approaching 3 men, moving at an unhurried pace. They weren't wearing the black suits of city men like Thornton, but rather the practical clothing of locals. Still, Sophia remained tense, her fingers clutching the silver locket around her neck. The riders drew rein at the edge of the clearing, and one raised his hand in greeting. "Afternoon, Winters. Didn't expect to see you folks out this way." The tension in Lucas's posture eased slightly, though he remained alert. "Sheriff Miller, what brings you out here?" Sophia's breath caught. This was the sheriff Lucas had spoken of, the man they were traveling to see in Butte. What was he doing out here? "Following up on reports of cattle rustling near the Peterson place," the sheriff replied, dismounting. He was an older man with a silver mustache and keen eyes that took in the scene with practiced efficiency. "Got word this morning that strangers have been asking about a young woman at the stations between here and Helena." William stepped forward. "What kind of strangers?" "City types. Well-dressed, offering money for information." Sheriff Miller's gaze moved past the Winters men to where Sophia stood partially concealed by the trees. "I'm guessing they might be looking for your companion there." Lucas hesitated, then motioned for Sophia to join them. "Sheriff, this is Miss Sophia Beaumont. She's the reason we were headed to see you in Butte." Sophia moved forward on trembling legs, her mind racing. If men were already searching for her, Thornton must have reported back to her stepfather. The danger was more immediate than she had feared. "Miss Beaumont." Sheriff Miller tipped his hat respectfully. Seems you've caused quite a stir. Care to tell me why men from St. Louis are hunting for you in my territory?" In that moment, looking into the sheriff's weathered face, Sophia made a decision. If he was to be her ally, he deserved the full truth. "Sheriff Miller," she said, finding her voice, "I have evidence that my stepfather, Henry Blackwell, murdered my father 3 years ago. The men looking for me work for him, and they're trying to silence me before I can present this evidence to the authorities." If the sheriff was shocked by this declaration, he hid it well. "That's a serious accusation, young lady." "Yes, sir, and I have proof to back it." Sophia touched her locket. "In a lockbox in Butt." Sheriff Miller studied her for a long moment, then looked to Lucas. "You believe her story, Winters?" "Every word of it," Lucas replied without hesitation. "She was thrown from a moving train to prevent her from reaching Butt. I saw it happen." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "Thrown from a train, that's attempted murder." "Yes, sir," Sophia confirmed. "By a man named Edward Thornton, who works for my stepfather." Miller stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Well, that changes things. If what you're saying is true, Miss Beaumont, you're in considerable danger." He glanced at the position of the sun. "We're closer to my ranch than Butt. I suggest we head there for now. It's safer than the town, where strangers can easily spot you." William nodded in agreement. "John's right, Lucas. The sheriff's place is well defended and we can send someone to Butt for the lockbox." Lucas turned to Sophia. "What do you think? It's your decision." The fact that he deferred to her judgment, treating her as an equal partner in this endeavor rather than a helpless woman to be protected, strengthened Sophia's resolve. "If the sheriff thinks it's safer, then I agree. But we need that lockbox as soon as possible." "I'll send my deputy," Miller offered. "Trustworthy boy, and he knows the banker in Butt." He remounted his horse. "My place is about 3 hours' ride from here. If we leave now, we'll arrive before dark." As they prepared to depart, Lucas moved close to Sophia, helping her back onto her mare. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "We can still make for Butt if you prefer." Sophia looked up at him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I trust your judgment, and Sheriff Miller seems honorable. If this is the safer path, then it's what we should do." Lucas's hand lingered on hers. "I won't let anything happen to you, Sophia. I promise." In that moment, with danger closing in around them and an uncertain future ahead, Sophia realized with startling clarity that she was falling in love with Lucas Winters. The thought should have terrified her, adding one more complication to an already impossible situation. But instead, it filled her with a strange, serene certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Sheriff John Miller's ranch was nestled in a sheltered valley. The main house, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney that sent smoke curling into the twilight sky. Unlike the sprawling Winters property, Miller's place was compact and defensible, with clear sight lines in all directions and few places for an intruder to hide. As they approached, a woman appeared on the porch, tall and straight-backed, with silver-streaked dark hair and the same keen eyes as the sheriff. She watched their approach with a rifle held casually but competently in her hands. "That's Sarah, the sheriff's wife," Lucas explained to Sophia as they rode into the yard. "Former Army Scout's daughter, best shot in 3 counties. Sophia's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Is she going to welcome us or shoot us?" Lucas chuckled. "Both if we give her cause. John." Sarah Miller called out as they dismounted. "Wasn't expecting a party." The sheriff dismounted and approached his wife. "We've got a situation, Sarah. This is Miss Beaumont from St. Louis. She needs our protection until we can sort out a matter of justice." Sarah's sharp eyes assessed Sophia, taking in her borrowed dress and the bruises still visible on her face. Something in her expression softened. "Well, come in then. You look like you could use a hot meal and some coffee." Inside, the Miller home was as practical and well-ordered as its mistress. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large table, comfortable chairs by the fireplace, and walls lined with bookshelves and mounted weapons. It was a frontier home, built for survival rather than show, but there were touches of beauty hand-stitched quilts, dried flowers in pottery vases, a piano in one corner. While Sarah prepared a meal with the efficiency of a woman accustomed to unexpected guests, Sheriff Miller sent one of his men to butt with instructions to retrieve Sophia's lockbox from the bank. The others established a watch rotation, with men positioned around the property to warn of any approach. "No one will get near this place without us knowing," Miller assured Sophia as they sat at the table. "Now, Miss Beaumont, I'd like to hear your story in full, everything from the beginning." Over bowls of venison stew and fresh bread, Sophia recounted her tale: her father's marriage to her mother after her birth father's death, the building of their shipping business, the introduction of Henry Blackwell as a business partner, and eventually her mother's second marriage to Blackwell following Alexander Beaumont's suspicious death. "At first, I accepted the story that father's horse had been spooked by a snake during his ride with Henry," Sophia explained. "I was grieving, and Henry was so solicitous, so careful to take care of everything." "When did you begin to suspect otherwise?" Miller asked, his expression grave. "About 6 months ago. I found letters in my father's study correspondence he'd hidden before his death. They detailed discrepancies in the company accounts, money that had gone missing over the years Henry had been involved with the business." Lucas leaned forward. "Your father suspected Blackwell of embezzlement, more than suspected. He had proof." Sophia's fingers twisted in her lap. "The letters indicated he was planning to confront Henry the day before their ride, the day before he died." Sheriff Miller exchanged a glance with his wife. "And these documents are in the lockbox in Butt?" "Yes, along with my father's journal, which details his suspicions, and financial records that show the pattern of theft." Sophia's voice grew stronger. "I believe Henry killed my father to prevent exposure, then married my mother to secure control of the company." "And your mother, does she suspect any of this?" Sophia's expression clouded. "My mother has been unwell since father's death. Henry keeps her sedated with laudanum, claiming it's for her nerves. I doubt she's aware of much these days." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications of her story sank in. Henry Blackwell had not only murdered a man and stolen his company, but he had effectively imprisoned his widow in a haze of opiates while hunting down her daughter to prevent the truth from emerging. "It's a solid case," Sheriff Miller said at last. "Circumstantial in parts, but the financial records and your father's own words will carry weight. Once we have the lockbox, I can take the evidence to the federal marshal in Helena." "Will that be enough?" Sophia asked anxiously. "Henry has connections in government, friends in high places." "Maybe in St. Louis," Miller replied, "but his reach is limited out here. Montana Territory has its own justice system, and we take murder seriously, no matter who commits it." Lucas, who had been silent for much of the conversation, finally spoke. "What about the man Thornton?" "He tried to kill Miss Beaumont. Shouldn't he be arrested immediately?" "He will be," Miller assured him. "I've already sent telegrams to the stations along the line. If he's still in the territory, we'll find him." Sarah Miller cleared the dishes and placed a pot of coffee on the table. "That's enough talk of murderers for tonight. Miss Beaumont looks dead on her feet, and the rest of you aren't much better." It was true. The day's journey, combined with the emotional toll of retelling her story, had left Sophia exhausted. She struggled to keep her eyes open as Sarah showed her to a small but comfortable bedroom at the back of the house. "You'll be safe here," Sarah promised, setting a lamp on the bedside table. "John's men are loyal, and they'll keep watch through the night. Thank you, Mrs. Miller." Sophia sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. "You and your husband are taking a risk for someone you don't even know." Sarah's expression softened. "My husband has been sheriff for 20 years, Miss Beaumont. He's a good judge of character, and if he believes you, so do I." She hesitated, then added, "Besides, young Lucas Winters wouldn't ride halfway across the territory for just anyone. That boy's got a good heart and a level head." Sophia felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Winters has been very kind." A knowing smile played at Sarah's lips. "Kind, is it? Well, if that's what you want to call the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching, then yes, he's been very kind indeed." Before Sophia could respond, Sarah patted her hand and moved toward the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Left alone, Sophia changed into the nightgown Sarah had provided and climbed into bed. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as her mind raced with the events of the day. The search for her in the territory meant her stepfather knew she had escaped Thornton. Would he send more men? How far would he go to silence her? And then there was Lucas. Sarah's words echoed in her mind, the way he looks at you, stirring emotions Sophia had been trying to suppress. Was it possible he felt the same inexplicable connection she did? And even if he did, what future could there be for them? She was a city woman with a price on her head. He was a rancher tied to the land his family had worked for generations. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Sophia!" Lucas's voice was low, barely audible. "Are you awake?" Heart suddenly racing, Sophia pulled a shawl around her shoulders and moved to the door, opening it just enough to see him standing in the dim hallway. "I wanted to check on you," he said. "Make sure you were all right." "I'm fine," she whispered, "just finding it hard to sleep." Lucas nodded in understanding. "Same here. I keep thinking about what's waiting for us tomorrow." "Are you worried?" "Not about the danger," he admitted. "I've faced worse. But I'm worried about what happens after, when this is all over and you have to decide what comes next." The vulnerability in his voice caught Sophia off guard. "What do you mean?" Lucas's eyes met hers in the low light. "When your stepfather is brought to justice, you'll be free to return to St. Louis, to your life there. He paused, searching for words. "I just wanted you to know that if you ever wanted a different kind of life, there's a place for you here, in Montana." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. "Lucas, are you saying?" "I'm saying I know it's too soon, and there's too much happening right now for either of us to be thinking clearly. But I can't ignore what I feel, Sophia." His hand moved as if to touch her face, then dropped back to his side. "I've never believed in love at first sight, but when I saw you that day, even in danger, even falling from that train, something in me recognized something in you." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. "I feel it too," she whispered. "But you're right, there's so much uncertainty ahead." "I'm not asking for promises," Lucas assured her. "Just think about it. Think about staying when all this is over." Before she could respond, footsteps sounded on the porch outside, and a moment later, urgent voices filled the main room. Lucas turned toward the sound, his body instantly alert. "Wait here," he said, already moving down the hall. Sophia quickly pulled on the dress she'd worn that day and followed, caution overwhelmed by curiosity and concern. In the main room, Sheriff Miller was speaking with a young man, presumably his deputy, who looked exhausted and agitated. "They got to the bank before me," the deputy was saying. "Broke in last night, the lockbox is gone." Sophia's heart plummeted. "No," she gasped, drawing all eyes to her, "without those documents." "Easy, Miss Beaumont," Miller said, his expression grim but composed. "Jim here was able to track the men who took it. 3 riders headed east toward the railroad. "Thornton," Sophia said with certainty. "He must have realized I survived and figured out where I was headed." Lucas moved to her side. "How far ahead are they?" "About 4 hours," the deputy replied. "They're pushing hard, likely trying to catch the eastbound train at Silver Bow Junction tomorrow morning." Miller was already strapping on his gun belt. "Then we ride tonight. If they make that train, we'll lose them and the evidence." "I'm coming with you," Lucas declared, his tone brooking no argument. William Winters, who had been silent until now, nodded. "I'll stay here with Frank and Tom to protect Miss Beaumont. The rest of you go." "No," Sophia interjected, drawing surprised looks from the men. "I'm going too. Those are my father's papers, and this is my fight." "Sophia, it's too dangerous," Lucas protested. "More dangerous than being thrown from a moving train," she countered. "I've come too far to wait behind while others risk their lives for my cause." She turned to Miller. "Sheriff, I know these men. I know what the documents contain. You might need me." Miller considered her for a long moment, then nodded. "The lady has a point, Winters. Besides, we can protect her better if she's with us than if we leave her here with a smaller force." Lucas looked like he wanted to argue further, but the determination in Sophia's eyes must have convinced him. "All right," he conceded, "but you stay close to me, understand?" "I understand." Sophia's voice was steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "How soon can we leave?" 20 minutes, Miller replied. "Just long enough to gather supplies and fresh horses. Jim, show us the trail they're following." As the men dispersed to prepare, Sarah approached Sophia with a bundle of clothing. "You'll want these," she said, handing over riding pants, a flannel shirt, and a sturdy jacket. "Chasing outlaws in a dress will get you killed." Grateful for the practical woman's foresight, Sophia changed quickly in her room. The men's clothing felt strange against her skin, but allowed a freedom of movement her dresses never had. When she emerged, Lucas did a double take, his eyes widening briefly before he composed himself. "Ready?" he asked, handing her a canteen and a small revolver. "Do you know how to use this?" "My father taught me," Sophia replied, checking the chambers with practiced ease. "He believed women should be able to defend themselves." A ghost of a smile touched Lucas's lips. "Your father was a wise man." Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead in the vast Montana sky. Fresh horses were saddled and waiting, stamping impatiently in the yard. Sheriff Miller gave final instructions to the men staying behind, while his deputy pointed out their route on a map spread across his saddle. As Sophia mounted her horse, a swift bay mare that seemed eager for the chase, she felt a strange calm descend over her. After days of running, of being hunted, she was finally turning to face her pursuers. Whatever happened in the hours ahead would determine not just justice for her father, but the course of her own future. Lucas rode up beside her, his face half hidden in shadow. "Last chance to change your mind," he said softly. Sophia straightened in her saddle. "I'm not changing my mind, Lucas. Not about this, and not about what you asked me earlier." His head turned sharply toward her. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, gathering her courage, "that when this is over I'd like to stay in Montana with you." For a moment Lucas seemed speechless. Then, in a movement so swift she barely saw it coming, he leaned across the space between them and pressed his lips to hers, a kiss both gentle and fierce, filled with promise and sealed under the witness of 1,000 stars. "Then let's finish this," he said as they broke apart, his voice husky with emotion. "So we can begin." Sheriff Miller's voice rang out, calling the group to order. With a final shared glance that held more meaning than words could express, Sophia and Lucas turned their horses eastward, following the others into the night toward danger, toward justice, and perhaps, if fortune favored them, toward a future together in the wild land they both now called home. The night wore on as they rode, following the clear trail left by Thornton and his men. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. Sophia's body ached from the sustained exertion, her injuries from the fall protesting with each jolt of the horse's gait, but she kept pace without complaint. Too much depended on their success. Sheriff Miller set a grueling pace, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and check the trail. During one such stop, as the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern horizon, the deputy handed around a flask of coffee. "They're slowing down," he reported, pointing to tracks that showed the horses ahead walking rather than galloping. "Probably trying to save their mounts for the final push to Silver Bow Junction." Miller nodded thoughtfully. "That gives us an advantage. Their horses are tiring faster than ours." "How much further to the junction?" Sophia asked, trying to ignore the exhaustion seeping into her bones. "About 10 miles, Lucas answered. "But there's rough country between here and there, a narrow pass through those hills." He pointed to a dark line of ridges ahead. Miller's expression grew serious. "That pass would be a good place for an ambush if they've realized we're following." "They know," Lucas said with certainty. "They've been watching their back trail. See those double loops in their path? That's not random wandering. They were checking for pursuers." The sheriff grunted in agreement. "Then we need to be smart about this. Jim, you and I will continue following the main trail. Lucas, you take Miss Beaumont and circle around to the north. There's an old mining road that cuts through those hills and comes out just west of the junction. You might be able to get ahead of them." Lucas nodded, already studying the terrain. "If we push hard, we could reach the junction before they do, cut them off before they get to the train." "Exactly. But be careful if they spot you, they'll know we've split our forces." Miller checked his pocket watch. "First train eastbound is at 8:15. That gives you just over 3 hours." As the group prepared to separate, Sophia felt a flutter of anxiety. The plan was logical, but it meant facing even greater danger with fewer protectors. Still, she trusted Lucas, and the prospect of intercepting Thornton before he could escape with her father's documents gave her renewed determination. They parted ways as the sky shifted from black to deepest blue. Lucas led Sophia north, away from the main trail and into rougher country. The path they followed was barely visible, an old track used by miners years ago when silver had been discovered in these hills. "Stay close," Lucas cautioned as they picked their way through a rocky stretch. "This trail gets treacherous in places." Sophia guided her mare carefully behind his stallion, impressed by the sure-footedness of both animals on the difficult terrain. "Have you traveled this way before?" "A few times. My father and I hunted in these hills when I was younger." His voice held a note of nostalgia. "He taught me every trail and game path for 50 miles around our ranch." "You must have been close to him." Lucas nodded. "Still am. My father is the most honorable man I know. Everything worthwhile I learned from him." "He must be proud of you," Sophia observed. "The way you've risked yourself to help a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore, Sophia." Lucas glanced back at her, his expression soft despite the tension of their situation. "And yes, I think he is proud, though he'd never say so directly, not the Winter's way." They rode in comfortable silence for a time, the sky gradually lightening around them. The mining road wound its way up into the hills, offering occasional vistas of the valley they'd left behind. In the distance, Sophia could make out the thin line of railroad tracks stretching east toward Silver Bow Junction. As they crested a rise, Lucas reined in his horse, studying the landscape below. "There," he said, pointing to a plume of smoke visible above the trees. "That's the junction." "We've made good time." Sophia squinted against the growing light. "Can we reach it before the train?" "Yes, if we hurry." Lucas turned to her, his expression serious. "Sophia, when we get there, I want you to stay back. Let me and the sheriff handle Thornton. Lucas, please." His voice was urgent. "These men have already tried to kill you once. I can't. I won't risk losing you now." The raw emotion in his words silenced her protest. "All right," she agreed, "but I'll be close enough to identify them in the lockbox." Satisfied with this compromise, Lucas led them down the eastern slope toward the junction. The mining road eventually joined a wider trail that served the small outpost that had grown around the railroad station. Silver Bow Junction was hardly a town, just a station house, water tower, small hotel, and a handful of other buildings clustered around the tracks. As they approached from the west, keeping to the cover of trees that lined the valley, Sophia could see activity around the station. A few passengers with luggage waited on the platform, and a station master moved about, preparing for the morning train. "No sign of Thornton yet," Lucas murmured as they dismounted in a stand of pines overlooking the station. "But they can't be far behind." Sophia scanned the surrounding area anxiously, her hand going to the revolver tucked in her belt. "What if they've already passed us somehow? What if they're already there, waiting for the train? Then the sheriff will catch them from behind." Lucas checked his own weapon, a Winchester rifle he'd taken from his saddle. "Either way, they won't escape with your father's papers." They secured their horses and moved carefully through the trees, working their way closer to the station. From their new position, they had a clear view of both the platform and the main trail approaching from the west. "There," Sophia whispered suddenly, her heart jumping into her throat. "By the water tower." Lucas followed her gaze. A man in a dust-covered black suit stood in the shadow of the water tower, smoking a cigarette and checking his pocket watch. Even at this distance, Sophia recognized Edward Thornton's tall, lean frame and the distinctive way he held himself, arrogant, impatient. "That's Thornton," she confirmed. "But where are the others? And the lockbox?" As if in answer to her question, two more men emerged from the small hotel across from the station. Unlike Thornton, they were dressed in the practical clothing of frontiersmen, though their city boots and clean-shaven faces marked them as outsiders. One carried a small metal box tucked under his arm. "The lockbox," Sophia breathed. "They have it." Lucas's jaw tightened. "They're splitting up, making it harder to catch all of them." It was true. The two men with the lockbox headed toward the platform, while Thornton remained by the water tower, seemingly keeping watch. In the distance, the faint whistle of an approaching train could be heard. "We need to act now," Lucas said urgently. "Before the train arrives, stay here." "Lucas, wait." But he was already moving, slipping through the trees toward the station. Sophia watched anxiously as he made his way down the slope, using the terrain for cover. His plan, she realized, was to come up behind the platform where the two men with the lockbox waited. For a moment, she considered following his instruction to stay hidden. But as she watched Thornton scanning the area, a new concern struck her. Where was Sheriff Miller? If the lawman and his deputy were still following Thornton's trail, they might not arrive in time. Decision made, Sophia moved through the trees, paralleling Lucas's path but keeping to higher ground. If she could create a distraction, draw Thornton's attention away from Lucas's approach, it might give him the advantage he needed. The train whistle sounded again, closer now. On the platform, the two men with the lockbox grew visibly tense, checking the tracks and then the surrounding area. Thornton flicked away his cigarette and began moving toward them, his hand resting near the gun at his hip. Sophia reached the edge of the tree line, heart pounding. Lucas had made it to the back of the station building, using its bulk to shield his approach. None of Thornton's group had spotted him yet, but it was only a matter of time. Taking a deep breath, Sophia stepped out from the cover of the trees. "Edward Thornton," she called, her voice carrying across the open ground. "Looking for me?" All three men whirled toward her voice. Thornton's face registered shock, then fury, then a calculating smile that chilled Sophia to her core. "Miss Beaumont," he called back. "How unexpected." "I thought surely that fall would have killed you." "It nearly did," she replied, moving slowly to keep his attention. "But it seems my father's justice has protectors even here in Montana." Thornton's hand moved to his gun. "A temporary inconvenience. Mr. Blackwell will be pleased to know I found you after all." "He'll be less pleased when he's facing a hanging for murder," Sophia countered, aware that every second she kept him talking gave Lucas more time to position himself. A cruel laugh escaped Thornton. "With what evidence?" "The contents of that box," he nodded toward the lockbox. "Soon to be ashes scattered across 3 states. From the corner of her eye, Sophia saw movement. Lucas had reached the platform and was creeping toward the 2 men holding her father's evidence. But Thornton was growing impatient, his hand closing around his revolver. "Enough talk," he snapped. "You've caused enough trouble, Miss Beaumont." As he drew his weapon, a shot rang out, not from Thornton's gun, but from somewhere behind him. The bullet struck the ground at Thornton's feet, causing him to jump back in alarm. "Drop it, Thornton," Sheriff Miller's voice boomed across the station yard. "Next one goes through your head." Chaos erupted. Thornton dove for cover behind the water tower as Miller and his deputy appeared on horseback, rifles raised. The 2 men on the platform panicked, one drawing his gun, the other clutching the lockbox and looking desperately for escape. Lucas seized the moment, launching himself onto the platform. He tackled the armed man, sending them both crashing into a stack of luggage. The second man turned to run, but Sophia was already moving. She raced across the open ground toward the platform, her borrowed revolver steady in her hand. "Stop right there," she commanded, aiming at the man with the lockbox. "That belongs to me." The man froze, his eyes darting between Sophia's gun and the approaching figures of Miller and his deputy, who had dismounted and were advancing on Thornton's position. "Don't be a fool, Curtis," Sophia heard Thornton shout from behind the water tower. "Shoot her." But the man called Curtis seemed to have lost his nerve. Slowly, he set the lockbox on the platform and raised his hands. Lucas, having subdued the first man, moved quickly to secure Curtis. He glanced at Sophia with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "I thought I told you to stay hidden." "You're welcome," she replied, lowering her gun as he took control of the situation. A gunshot echoed from the water tower, followed by a cry of pain. Sophia turned to see Sheriff Miller clutching his arm, blood seeping between his fingers. His deputy returned fire, forcing Thornton back into cover. "He's making a run for the trees," the deputy shouted as Thornton abandoned the water tower and sprinted toward the forest edge where Sophia had emerged minutes before. Without thinking, Sophia raised her revolver and fired. The shot went wide, but it slowed Thornton enough for Lucas to take aim with his Winchester. His shot caught Thornton in the leg, sending him sprawling to the ground with a howl of pain. Within moments, it was over. The deputy secured Thornton while Miller, despite his injury, kept the other 2 men covered. Lucas retrieved the lockbox, examining it carefully for damage before bringing it to Sophia. "Is this it?" he asked. "Your father's evidence." With trembling hands, Sophia took the box, feeling its familiar weight. "Yes, the key is in my locket." As the train pulled into the station, the very train that would have carried her father's killers to freedom, Sophia opened her locket and removed the tiny key. With Lucas standing protectively beside her, she unlocked the box. Inside lay her father's journal and the financial records that proved Henry Blackwell's embezzlement and provided motive for murder. "It's all here," she said, relief washing over her. "Everything we need to bring him to justice." Sheriff Miller approached, his deputy having bandaged his arm. "Well, Miss Beaumont, it seems you've caught yourself some murderers." He nodded to Thornton, who glared at them with undisguised hatred as he was held at gunpoint. "What would you like us to do with them?" "Take them to the territorial marshal," Sophia replied without hesitation. "Along with this evidence, my stepfather must answer for what he's done." Miller nodded in agreement. "We'll put them on this train under guard heading west to Helena instead of east to their employer. The marshal there will know how to proceed." As the sheriff organized the prisoners for transport, Lucas drew Sophia away from the commotion. In the quiet moment between danger and resolution, he took her hands in his eyes searching her face. "You could have been killed," he said softly. "When I saw you step out like that, facing Thornton, I knew you needed a distraction." Sophia squeezed his hands. "And I'm tired of running, of being afraid. It was time to face him." Pride and something deeper shone in Lucas's eyes. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known, Sophia Beaumont." "Brave enough to start a new life?" she asked. "Here in Montana." Instead of answering with words, Lucas drew her close, his kiss conveying everything words could not: relief, admiration, and a love that had bloomed improbably but undeniably in the midst of danger and pursuit. When they finally parted, the train whistle sounded a signal that one journey was ending, but another was just beginning. 3 months later, Sophia stood on the porch of the Winters Ranch, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. Winter had settled over the land, draping the distant mountains in snow and bringing a crisp clarity to the air that never existed in St. Louis. So much had changed since that fateful day at Silver Bow Junction. Edward Thornton and his accomplices had been tried and convicted for their crimes, their testimony leading to an investigation of Henry Blackwell's business dealings. Faced with mounting evidence and former associates eager to save themselves by providing information, Blackwell had been arrested and now awaited trial for the murder of Alexander Beaumont. Sophia's mother, freed from her stepfather's control and the laudanum that had clouded her mind for years, had begun the slow process of recovery. She remained in St. Louis under the care of Sophia's aunt, their relationship healing gradually through letters exchanged weekly. As for Sophia herself, she had found a new purpose and a new home. The Winters family had welcomed her with open arms, and the community of Butte had embraced her as one of their own. She had used a portion of her inheritance restored to her through the courts to establish a small school on the edge of town, fulfilling her dream of teaching while creating a place of learning for children who had previously ridden miles for education. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the long drive leading to the ranch house. Lucas was returning from town, his tall figure silhouetted against the evening sky. Sophia's heart quickened at the sight of him, a reaction that hadn't diminished in the months since their first meeting. He dismounted in the yard and handed his horse to the stable boy before climbing the steps to join her on the porch. Snow dusted his shoulders and hat, and his cheeks were ruddy from the cold. "Waiting long?" he asked, removing his hat and brushing off the snow. "Not too long." Sophia smiled up at him. "How was town?" "Good. Got the supplies Martha needed." Lucas hesitated, a curious light in his eyes. "And I picked up something else while I was there." "Oh," Sophia raised an eyebrow. "What kind of something?" Instead of answering, Lucas reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as he opened it, revealing a ring, a simple gold band set with a single, perfect pearl. "I know we haven't known each other long by most standards," Lucas said, his voice husky with emotion. "But when you know, you know. And I knew from the moment I saw you falling from that train that my life was about to change forever." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as he continued. "Sophia Beaumont, you're the bravest, smartest, most beautiful woman I've ever met. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she whispered without hesitation. "Yes, Lucas Winters, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Sophia thought of the incredible journey that had brought them together, a journey that began with danger and desperation, but had led to love and a future brighter than she could have imagined. Lucas drew her into his arms, his kiss warm despite the winter chill around them. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I have one more surprise," he said. "I bought that parcel of land we looked at last week, the one with the view of the mountains and the creek running through it." Sophia's eyes widened. "For our home," he nodded. "We can start building as soon as the spring thaw comes. Design it however you like." "A library," she said immediately. "A big one with shelves from floor to ceiling," Lucas laughed. "And a wide porch where we can watch the sunset together. And rooms for children," Sophia added softly. "A house filled with laughter and love." The tenderness in Lucas's eyes, as he looked at her, made Sophia's heart overflow with gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. From the terror of being thrown from a train had come the greatest blessing of her life, a man who had ridden alongside her in danger and pulled her to safety, and who now stood beside her as they built a future together in the wild beauty of Montana. As twilight deepened into night and stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Sophia and Lucas remained on the porch, planning their future, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together just as they had from the very beginning. Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers and new growth that transformed the Montana landscape. The wedding of Lucas Winters and Sophia Beaumont was held on a perfect May morning, with the mountains standing witness and the entire community of Butte in attendance. Sheriff Miller, fully recovered from his wound, gave the bride away in the absence of her father, and Martha Winters wept unashamedly as her nephew pledged his life to the woman he loved. In the years that followed, the Winters name became synonymous with integrity and justice throughout the territory. Lucas expanded the ranch operations, introducing new breeding stock that improved cattle herds across Montana. Sophia's school flourished, eventually growing into an academy that drew students from neighboring settlements. Their home, built on the land Lucas had purchased, became known for its hospitality and warmth. True to their plans, it featured a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a wide porch perfect for watching sunsets. And in time, it filled with the laughter of children, first a son they named Alexander William after both their fathers, then twin daughters, Emily and Grace, and finally another boy, James, who had his father's eyes and his mother's indomitable spirit. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the summer twilight, Lucas took Sophia's hand in his thumb brushing over the wedding band that had joined the pearl engagement ring. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" he asked quietly. "If I hadn't been riding that particular stretch of track that day," Sophia leaned her head against his shoulder. "Sometimes. But then I remember what my father used to say, that there are no accidents in life, only appointments we didn't know we had." Lucas smiled, drawing her closer. "Then I'm grateful for that appointment, Mrs. Winters, the day I rode alongside a falling angel and found the love of my life." as the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in colors no artist could capture. Sophia thought of the long, winding path that had led her here from danger to safety, from loss to love, from a city girl to a woman of the West. The journey had not been easy, but every step had led her to this moment, this man, this life she cherished, and she wouldn't change a single thing.